The HomeTech podcast is supported by you. To find out more, go to HomeTech.fm/support. This is the HomeTech podcast for Friday, May 1st. May? Really? From Sarasota, Florida, I'm Seth Johnson.
And from Denver, Colorado, I'm Jason Griffin. Your sense of time warped. I read an article just before we got on the show, actually, about there's like people studying this, where people are feeling like time has slowed down because of the quarantine. I know I'm experiencing it. April felt like such a long month.
March was a long year.
Yeah, totally. I think, there's definitely some memes there, but I noticed you're wearing a hat, Seth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's because if you look under the hat, there is a mess of hair, and
It's quite the do.
I have not figured out how to cut it yet. Let's just put the hat back on.
Well, I got some pro tips for you if you need them.
I can see that.
Yeah. Is it maybe the first time ever that I'm glad to be going bald?
Yeah, well, I don't have that luxury. I don't know if it is it doesn't bother me that much, but it's just weird because like usually at 3 weeks, I'm like, I need to get a haircut. And then sometime around the 4th week, I actually go in and get the haircut. So like, it's just my procrastination. And like, finally I'll get a haircut. I get all cut down. It looks great. And then 3 weeks later, I need to go back in. And now I think we're running up on that like 5th week. And I'm going to be a mountain man before too long. I should grow out a beard. That doesn't fly well in the house. Both my wife and my daughter are like, you have a scratchy face. And they're like, both of them. Like,
doesn't pass the committee.
Yep. Does not work well.
Well, I've been seeing all the articles come across, barbers providing tips for cutting your hair at home. And I'm not sure those are of much assistance.
And I like, what's worse? Like a no haircut or a bad haircut? Which one's worse? I think no haircut is probably okay. And if you have the bad haircut,
you know what you got to do? You just if you just focus on the sideburns,
yeah,
and you kind of keep the neckline clean.
Yeah, I've done that. I've been able to do that. Yeah.
Then at least you're presentable. The struggle's real. Everyone I know with hair is talking about how badly they need a haircut. Anthony said even his dog needs a haircut. I can tell you, my son is in desperate need of a haircut.
Yeah.
So the struggle's real. Well, let's jump into it. We got a great show here this week. We had Rob Martens on, and Rob is the Senior Vice President and Chief Innovation and Design Officer at Allegion. And that's not a brand name probably that most of our listeners are familiar with, but they're a very large company with their hands in a lot of different areas, including Schlage, the smart locks. So that's the tie-in that most of our listeners will be familiar with, and we get into a little bit of that. But generally, Rob just has a really great perspective. He's a futurist, and he thinks a lot about, we talk about sort of looking around corners and talking about the state of the IoT, the Internet of Things. That's a phrase we haven't used as much on the show, certainly as we did when we first started, but he's really enjoyed the conversation with him. Again, has some very unique perspectives, and just talking about the state of where things are at now. Hint, it's not all good. And he's got some strong opinions on that, and talks about some of his ideas about how things can continue to improve for consumers. So really enjoyed that conversation.
Yep, it was a good conversation. Well, Jason, what do you say we jump into some home tech headlines?
Let's do it. Addressing the tough times that the custom installation industry and the world have been facing, the CEDIA Expo has issued an update to help industry members adapt to doing business during the uncertainty of the coronavirus crisis. In the update from Emerald Executive Vice President Brian Pagel, he acknowledges how powerful the personal connections and exchanging ideas are for propelling the industry forward. But even more importantly, he emphasizes is that the health and safety of CEDIA Expo attendees and exhibitors and staff remain the highest priority. So this announcement goes on, Seth, to outline a bunch of things that the CEDIA Expo is doing. They've put a task force together to ensure the health and safety of attendees this fall. This, of course, all being predicated on the assumption that CEDIA actually happens this fall, which I think is still a big question mark in my mind.
Still a big question mark in my mind. I suppose they could have some kind of minimal show. If they really got down to it, I don't know. Like right now, as it stands, literally almost to a person, everyone I talk to is like, I'm not going. Like I haven't found
Right.
one person that says I'm going, but that's right now. And September is a ways away. So will people show up in Denver? But I think, yeah, maybe that can happen. The bigger question I have for CEDIA, not really asking them, but like the bigger question I have, I guess in general, is like right now is when a company has to start thinking about attending CEDIA and what they're going to do and allocating budgeting and that kind of thing. What's the show floor going to look like if, it's not going to look very big if there are a lot of people pulled out.
Right.
And with it's not like the Colorado Convention Center is a cheap place to rent. Like they have to pay for that space. And I imagine both the convention center and CEDIA or Emerald in this case have to work together to figure out, how that all works. CEDIA is a pretty big show, and I imagine that Colorado Convention Center was banking on them coming in and renting a designated space. And I imagine that the Convention Center was also banking on, half a dozen other large shows showing up and booking that space this year too.
Yeah.
Only to come to find, that's all canceled as well. So I'm really curious to see what happens to these types of shows. And I got the email this morning saying they were going to have the sanitation stations and hand washing encouraged. They're going to be working on figuring out ways to reduce like the crowd on the show floor and maybe doing like social distancing practices within the classes, which I don't know. Maybe I guess they're going to use the front rows of those. It's like every class I've ever gone to, it's like nobody sits in the front couple rows, and it's like they all sit towards the back where they can get out easily.
That's right.
Like, that's pretty much what I've noticed.
Yeah. It's hard to say. We were having a good chat about this in the hub, and I think James, good friend of the show, reminded me and us that ISE was down by about a third in terms of attendance this year, and that was back in January when. Now, granted, ISE is an international show, and coronavirus was a much bigger deal in many other parts of the world at that time than it was here in the U.S. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison, but you just gotta think if at that time it was enough to hit attendance by a third for ISE, if it's anything like it is today, what does that spell for CEDIA? So I think it's a big question. I know that me personally, if I had to make my choice today, I wouldn't go. But a lot can change in 4 or 5 months. I was commenting in the hub that back in February, I flew to Boston a couple of times, and that feels like a lifetime ago. So a lot can change between now and September. So it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out.
Well, good news. Starting April 27th, business owners here in the States can once again begin applying to their lending institutions for access to the additional $370 billion in coronavirus funds made available for small businesses to weather out the COVID-19 outbreak. I don't know why I said that. Like it's like literally the only thing on your mind. COVID-19 outbreak. How do you do that? This round of funding is scheduled to end by June 30th. With exceptions for agricultural lending. But some banks and lending institutions expect the funding could run out within 14 days. Yeah, if anything says, I think anything says, like, you shouldn't listen to this, like, how long they think this funding is going to last. Look at what happened last time with, like, literally it was gone within, like, a few days.
Oh, yeah.
Like 7 days, I think. It was
feeding
all gone.
frenzy.
Yeah, get out there and apply for this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, this second round here is called the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act. The PPP and HCE Act was signed into law on April 24th. Makes available $310 billion to the Paycheck Protection Program, and then $60 billion to the SBA's EIDL loans, which we talked about a couple episodes ago when we had Chris Williams on. So. You're right. I mean, if you haven't gotten one of these loans, you haven't gotten approved for one of these loans, don't delay. Get out there and get that done. This money's going to go fast, and the whole thing is just really scary to think about. Just it's in a sense, it's commendable for the government to be doing everything that they're doing to help businesses through this. But, these kinds of numbers that are getting thrown around right now and the amount of money that's getting air quote printed at the moment is just, it's really hard to wrap your brain around, and what sort of unintended consequences this could have. And I'm no economist, but the whole thing just feels a little bit scary. So hard to know what to make of it all.
Yeah, definitely shaky. You have, I look at all these restaurants that I drive by that are closed. And it's like, well, if they gave the green light to go, I keep saying this, they gave the green light to go tomorrow, like open up the state, which, they may do. I don't know. Florida is crazy. I'm not going to those restaurants, and like they're going to open back up and have people working in there. Like that's not going to work well. And then what happens when they can't make their payroll or rent? Like then you start having, rent issues. Then all the people like down, it all just folds downstream to like the mortgage markets and all that stuff. I think I saw a thing in one of the like New York Times or something where somebody had bought like 22 Airbnb properties and they have 22 mortgages to pay now. It's like, that's going to sting.
Yeah.
All that's going to sting, and it's going to come back to get us.
Yeah. I don't think that business is coming back. That guy's business anyways.
No.
Wow. Crazy.
We've already paid for ours in Denver.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're getting that money back either.
Yeah. Crazy. All right. Well, moving on here to one more COVID-related story. Best Buy has announced plans to reopen 200 of its retail locations with appointment-only in-store consultations for customers starting in May. The plan includes a series of strict safety measures for both employees and customers that must be followed. With the new in-store consultation service, customers will be able to schedule schedule appointments, I should say, for their tech essential needs. Since each customer's appointment will have a dedicated sales associate, there will be a limited number of customers in the store at any one time to ensure appropriate social distancing takes place, says the company.
How cool is this?
This is interesting.
Like, there's like a whole consultation part of it. Yeah. And then like I need to get in to buy, I don't know, like I'm not really going to Best Buy without something really in mind to buy anymore. I don't know if there's any like, I'm sure there are people who are casual technology shoppers. If you're out there, I don't know. I've never met you, but like most people have researched this stuff or gone to Best Buy and talked to somebody. And like, what a cool like way to utilize, these massive 200 massive stores, as basically like a white glove sales treatment, right? Like this is really a cool way of doing this.
Right. Well, I think it is, an example of the kinds of, obviously we all are having conversations and thinking about what things look like when we sort of start to get back to normal. And obviously it's not going to be just a flip of the switch and binary thing where we go back to business as usual. And it's like it was before. So I think this is a good example of the types of things that you're likely to see from all sorts of companies in terms of finding creative ways to start to get things a little bit back to normal and start to approximate that. Again, I think it remains to be seen. The choice is ultimately going to come down to the individual. And I think, it would have to be a pretty pressing need for me to go to Best Buy at this point. But certainly people are going to have varying comfort levels with that. And it's good to see. Again, I think you're going to see things. I mean, I've heard about restaurants that are going to be opening up with like half the tables to keep capacity down. So these sorts of examples, I suspect, are going to be very, very common in the months ahead.
Yeah, they were trying to do that here before we went on the full lockdown train. Like I know one of the people I know through other people, I guess they own like a pizza shop here in town, and they were seating already at half capacity just to keep their doors open and have people come in.
Right.
So yeah, it's going to be, like you said, it's going to be a trickle effect to getting back to normal and having people trust and understand what's going on. Like that's the biggest part of it. We have to feel safe to go out to Best Buy and cough on the racks of video games and DVDs, but like really, you have to, it comes down to a consumer not only trusting the store, but trusting that they're going to be safe when they go there. So,
yep.
I think this is such a great idea that they'll have like concierge shopping, I guess is the best way I can describe it. But I mean, they have really been able to figure out a way around this, and hopefully it works for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that'll do it for our headlines this week. All the topics that we've discussed can be found in our show notes at HomeTech.fm/301. Seth, we're on the other side of 300 now. While you're there, don't forget to sign up for our weekly newsletter. We'll send you show reminders and other occasional updates about all the great things going on here in the world of home tech. Once again, that link is HomeTech.fm/301.
And don't forget, you can join us in the chat room live Wednesday, starting sometime between 7:30 p.m. Eastern. You can find out more about that at HomeTech.fm/live.
All right. Well, Seth, without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into our interview. Again, we've got Rob Martens, the Senior Vice President and Chief Innovation and Design Officer for Allegion, and we hope you enjoy. Hey, Rob, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on here and joining us, and we're looking forward to jumping into a whole bunch of fun topics. I think you've got a really diverse set of experiences and perspectives that really look forward to sharing with our listeners. But before we jump into that, why don't you give everyone just a quick personal introduction and talk a little bit about your background and sort of what brought you to your current role in the IoT space.
Sure. So I would have, I guess, a fairly non-traditional background. I should probably qualify it by saying my father is a marine geochemist and an oceanographer, a research scientist, and my mother is a poet. So I have that whole right brain, left brain thing going on where we're not 100% sure what's up, but that's definitely been a contribution. But no, I've done a number of jobs. I've been in everything from marketing, product development. I've been a raw materials buyer, a purchasing agent, all the way through till I found myself as a corporate CIO for about 12 years. And found that I was getting a little bit tired of working on enterprise software like many CIOs do. And by virtue of working with some diversified industrial companies that had a lot of interesting technology, that my background in laboratory science and other things previously was incredibly helpful with the burgeoning world of IoT. And ultimately found myself retired at a relatively early age and invited to come back to a newly, freshly spun company called Allegion. And the last 5 to 6 years has just been an awesome ride and a really interesting ride for me.
Awesome. Talk a little bit about Allegion, because I know it's a big name, big company, lots of stuff going on, but it's not necessarily a name that most of our listeners or all of our listeners have heard of. So talk about who the company is and broadly speaking, the different areas that you guys are involved with, and also tell us a little bit about your current role in the company.
Sure. It's a little bit by design that most haven't heard about Allegion. We're a company focused on, think of Allegion as kind of the holding company, and we have a number of brands that hopefully some of your listeners are familiar with. I think probably the biggest brand from a smart home standpoint that they might know would be Schlage. They also might be familiar with a bike lock company called Kryptonite, or some others, depending on the geography that you live in. You might be familiar with some of our European brands, Cheesa, or a variety of others. So we focus on a platform that's built of mechanical, electromechanical, and some core software solutions that make us, in some cases, a direct-to-consumer brand like Schlage. And in our non-residential world, we act as an ecosystem partner in places, as various as, K through 12 schools, higher education, all the way through to institutional healthcare and things like that. But when it comes to the IoT, we're very broadly known for what some people like to call smart home. As you'll hear from me later, I hate that terminology. My role at the company is somewhat broad. I lead Allegion's strategic partnering, innovation, and design efforts in support of the company's broader innovation and growth strategy. But I'm also the company futurist. So futuring for us is pretty simple. We identify key trends that we see across markets, across geographies, In this case, today we're talking about some of those trends associated with connected home and the device space. And we leverage those to help Schlage and Allegion evolve and hopefully stay ahead of the curve, maybe peek around corners a little bit as to what's going on. The primary way that we do that is just creating a narrative associated with a trend that we see. For example, one that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit today is edge computing. Edge computing is this interesting blend of on-premise processing and cloud processing as well. And what's the right balance to give the best customer experience? What's the right UI UX for that? And when you kind of own that geography, if you will, around the door, edge computing becomes very important. And so we have a lot of companies that want to leverage, our technology, whether that be a mega tech like a Apple, Amazon, Google, Samsung, what have you. But even in a non-residential standpoint, we have lots of startups and lots of other partners who would like access to that geography.
Right. Talk a little bit about Allegion Ventures too. I know you guys do a lot of like R&D, and that's probably how you're doing your future, future peeking around the corner. I guess is the best. That's a pretty cool way of describing it, because you kind of like peek out a little bit ahead and around the corner and see what's coming next.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a number of innovation engines with Allegion. We usually like to call out 4 of them. One is what you would expect, right? Which is we have really robust engineering and IT capability. We have over 800 engineers around the world. Second, we're acquisitive. During Allegion's history, if you're familiar with us at all, you'll see we'll purchase people on occasion. We'll do some M&A work. But then you start getting into some of the more interesting innovation engines, one of which is Allegion Ventures. We launched Allegion Ventures in March of 2018. And Allegion Ventures focuses on investments in adjacent spaces to what we do. So we actually, for example, if you are a smart lock company and you came to me and said, hey, you want to invest in me, for ethical reasons, I would say, hey, are you sure you want us on your cap table? Depending on what your exit strategy is, that could diminish your ultimate return, right? But what it's really focused on is around these adjacencies, because there are lots of companies where we don't know today that those are really core technologies to where we're going to be tomorrow. But we think it's interesting, and we think it gives us unique perspective into what's coming next. One of the unique things about Allegion as an entity is we're really an ecosystem partner across many of our brands, which means we're not necessarily going to own everything that participates in that customer experience. And so one way that we can be a really good partner, and hopefully in many cases be the partner of choice for people, is by being as open as possible in terms of being easy to integrate with, making sure candidly as well that customers get value for their money. Let's not do proprietary things that, for example, hey, I changed from a iPhone to an Android device. Now I've got to change my door lock.
Right.
These types of things are kind of important. So Ventures allows for us to make some of those interesting investments in things that we might not necessarily make sense for us to own, but we want an opportunity to work with them closely and to help develop both their company and the technology itself.
I probably know more I'm more familiar with companies on your investments page than I am familiar with the products and brands on your main page. Schlage, I know, but
there you go.
Yeah, these other ones, I mean, I'm very familiar with Yonomi and Nuki iDevices. These are all prominent brands in the industry that we cover. So yeah,
and it's all really interesting stuff from the standpoint of we have a really creative relationship with these folks. When you look at startups, many times what people are looking for is more than just a capital investment, right? It's about, hey, can we do a proof of concept together? Can we do these things? And when you work in a business that has some products that are life and health safety type of things, you can't really experiment as much. So the other thing that Allegion has as our 4th innovation engine is we have an entity called Pin and Tumbler Studio that our typical cycle for creation is between 18 and 24 months because it has a long cycle for testing and things of that nature. But if we want to do something innovative with a startup or something ourselves, that we think is new and different. Pin and Tumbler Studio actually puts concepts out in 120 days or less.
Wow.
So we get after it pretty hard, and especially on the residential side where we see lots of evolution and a desire to stay ahead. Those latter two innovation engines are really important to us.
Very cool. Wow, that is incredibly fast. 120 days.
Yep. It's lots of fun.
Fun. Yes, it sounds like it. Okay, so we've said a lot about the smart home in general, but I know you have a problem with that little phrase there. So let's go ahead and dive into that real quick. It piqued my interest when I saw that fly by, and I'm gonna have to ask you, what's so not smart about my house if I'm calling it a smart home?
Yeah, and like I said, I think a lot of people probably share the same feelings that I have. Is first of all, calling it a smart home, to me is an excuse. It's a way to separate some devices in your home from others. And why should we expect less from things that are connected in terms of our user experience, how easy they are to use, how they use power, how secure they are, how private they are, versus all of the other things that we have in our home? So first of all, I would say, a number of people that you would talk to would say, what's smart about it? Anyway, it's just kind of a pain, in many cases. But what it really boils down to is three things from my perspective. And as a person who's responsible for industrial design and innovation at Allegion, and obviously no one person owns either one of those things, but we focus on three things. When we look at a connected device, an IoT device in particular, is one, is it secure? For us, security, especially with what we do, you have to have it. But security is on two levels for us. It's both mechanical and digital. So mechanically, security is, hey, can you easily pick the lock? Can you kick in the door? Can you steal can you rip the kryptonite lock off the bike? What have you? That's security physically. On the digital side of security, hey, how susceptible are you to a denial of service attack? How susceptible are you to any other type of hack, or do you have the right level of encryption? So security is number one, and that should be consistent regardless of whether it's a physical device or a combination of physical and digital device. The second element is scalability. And when we say scalability, for physical devices, we would say scalability is, hey, how many times can I use that lock before it breaks? Part of the reason why we, have a long development cycle for many things is when you have to test something literally 1 million times, or at least several hundred thousands of times, it just takes time in order to turn the lock, that many times. If you pivot that to digital for scalability, what we're talking about is, hey, what kind of load testing do you do? A lot of people see a lot of different people entering the IoT space, startups and stuff. When you look at scalability for an IoT device, you need to say, how is that device going to manage when we go from 5,000 users hitting it all at once to 500,000? Is it going to be the same? Is it going to be predictable? Because I would tell you, in our business, if your door doesn't unlock, that's a problem, So just as an example. And then last, and definitely not least, probably most important, is simplicity. So mechanically, how obvious is it how to use the product that you have? How easy is it? Was it easy to install? Is it easy to own? And then on the digital side of simplicity, hey, does that app that goes with it look like it belongs with it? Does it make sense? Is it intuitive? So in retrospect, part of the reason why I just hate calling it a smart home is I feel like we're making excuses for devices that are incredibly expensive compared to the other ones that you have, that should be making life easier for you, that should have these three components focused on and should be better than almost anything else you have. So security, scalability, simplicity. If you don't see those three things, and as a company, you're not delivering those three things, you're failing your customer.
Yeah, interesting perspective. And I think some of it is, as I'm hearing you talk that through, I find it really interesting because you guys come from this place where, like, when you look at smart locks in particular, there's this massive amount of overlap between just the old school model of physically interacting with a door lock and the new, I'll use air quotes, smart model that everybody talks about. And I think if I'm hearing you correctly, a lot of what you're saying is, sort of ditch the qualifier. These are people's homes, and they need things to be as secure, as reliable, and simple as they used to be before we made them smart, and therefore, like you were saying, in many cases, actually more painful to use. So let's kind of ditch that qualifier and just start talking about people's homes, and how do we make those better? It's interesting.
Exactly. And it works both ways. It's not always about taking complexity. Well, it is about taking complexity out, but it's not about diminishing the level of technology that we apply. So, for example, if I gave you an augmented reality user guide for your lock, where instead of even having to jump out to YouTube while you're doing your installation, because you're like everybody else, and when you pull the lock out, you just start installing it. You're not pulling the instructions out. You're not reading every technical thing. You want to put it on the door and get this job done. If we, for example, put an AR, augmented reality app out there that lets you point at it and it says, oh, you have a Schlage code lock. And based on where you're at right now, here, let me, in this augmented view through your phone that you're pointing at the lock, demonstrate to you what the next step is. Let me show you what it is. And by the way, let me actually point out that this, and this is the order that you're going to go in. And hey, at the same time, do you want me to go ahead and register this for you? Because this lock has a lifetime warranty. So if something happens with this, let me just go ahead and register this for you now so you don't have to go worry about it later. I think all of these elements, if we can find out how to just think like the consumer instead of like the manufacturer that is putting a piece of metal out that happens to be connected to the internet, put ourselves in their shoes, have, more empathy towards the user that is trying to do this. And instead of saying, look at all the integrations we have, look at all these, fabulous things it can do, think about it as a total ecosystem and think about it in terms of what's the experience going to be like for somebody who is either putting their first IoT device that they've ever bought in, or for somebody who's saying, hey, I run Yonomi, on, for all my, other devices and all these things, and I'm replacing this Z-Wave lock with, this new Wi-Fi one. We've got to be able to serve for all of them, because I think part of the problem with smart home, it isn't just, the qualifier and the quality. It's very much around the installation experience.
Right. Yeah, I think there's an interesting, very popular adage in the world of product management that focus on the outcome, not the output. And I think a lot of times we get fixated on features and perhaps forget that Martin Pleen, the former CEO of Control4, I've gotten to know fairly well over the years, and he's got a sort of a mental model, a framework that he always uses, which is like, let's make sure we're looking at this problem from the outside in, right? Like, because we get too stuck looking at stuff from how can we fill up the feature sheet, and we forget that it may not actually make the user's lives better. So I think that sounds obvious when you say it in a context like this, but it's actually incredibly difficult, I think, when you're in the midst of designing a product or a service to keep yourself in that headspace. So I love the way you frame that. Specifically around AR, I want to talk about that for a minute, because you guys probably have a really interesting perspective on this, and it's something that Seth and I we've talked about a little bit on the show. We've sort of danced around this topic a couple of times, and it just seems like there's so much potential for those sorts of things. I just imagine that being able to hold up my phone and literally have it walk me through the installation of a smart lock. I think that's a really compelling use case. Are there other areas, just broadly speaking, where you see like what do you see on the horizon for for AR in terms of its role in the, in the home of the future?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm super excited about AR. I think that it's an incredibly untapped technology at this point. So I think what it really boils down to is, how are you implementing it? Everybody's kind of blown away at first, and you see it for the first time, and then in certain people's minds, it gets stale. And the reason it gets stale is because you're not, you're, instead of doing the wow factor stuff, you need to start doing the practical things. So, for example, it would be very helpful in our case, just to give you a simple example, is if I were to point my phone at my lock and say, "Who's here? Who's here right now? Who is in the house walking in, or who left?" If we have, there's plenty of technology that would allow for us to give a simple visual indication of, any type of information that IoT device has embedded on it. And then candidly, if you're a more advanced user and you've got your information, aggregating, between a variety of devices, to point at any number of devices, whether it's your lock or whether it's just at your front door in general, or some other element, to give you a real-time status of what's going on. I think AR provides just such a intuitive, interactive opportunity to demonstrate simply where and what is happening. And through the interface that you're having on your phone or what have you, have the ability to immediately react to it without having to bounce from app to app, or to other tools that today, you're swiping and sweeping. We have this limitation, right? And I know your listeners can't see it, but this is a very small screen that I'm holding up right here. It's very difficult to do all those things, and I think AR becomes a really logical shortcut to just a better user experience overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's in its infancy, but I can see where kind of those what do they call them? The sight lines are going to come to a point at the end of the road there, because like I'm thinking about things I do around the house myself. If literally anything you need to do or find out how to do is on YouTube. Like, you can just go there. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Somebody out in rural West Virginia has put together a YouTube video of him shaking camera, but at least he gets the point across about exactly how to do something. And it's pretty amazing that all that the world's knowledge could be there. So yeah, I think that having the ability to have that video and instruction, but then also like couple it with what you see in front of you physically in the real world, will be a game changer when it comes to education or instructions and that kind of thing. It'd be very, very helpful.
Even any kind of status. I mean, like, so for example, Schlage has awesome, one of the things I'm really proud of is people, hate changing batteries. And so when we first introduced like the encode lock, people were really worried with Wi-Fi because they're like, oh my God, how often am I going to have to change batteries? What are they? So we've tried to do things like, hey, make sure you have non-proprietary batteries. Make sure they plug in. Like, for me, I'm going to date myself here. It's like our batteries plug in like an Atari 2600 cartridge used to in the game system, right? Just intuitive ways to do it. But imagine that you took AR, right? And you just point your camera at the lock and it says, hey, you have 50% battery life. Or you have, any number of things. I think you're right. I just think it's a question of applying the technology in a useful way. And instead of spamming people with unnecessary gadgets, to you guys' point before, and integrations and things that they don't want, be practical as to how you implement the technology. And that would be one thing that I, again, would say Schlage, after, being in business for 100 years, that's something we're really good at. We pride ourselves in. It's not about the technology for technology itself. It's about how you apply it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we just celebrated our 300th episode, which roughly translates to Jason and I sitting down once a week for the past 5-ish years. When we started this, there was a little company called Nest. They were just out making thermostats. The second week, I think, Nest was purchased by Google for billions of dollars. It was crazy. And then from then it was just like an insane amount of Kickstarter projects, just product being launched, light bulbs with speakers put in them, the most insane amount of home tech product that I could have ever imagined from then on. It was like a gold rush, and it seems to have slowed down a little bit. I mean, we still have that. I'm still waiting for that connected salt shaker that's still out there. I think that hasn't shipped yet, but it seems to have slowed down, and the industry itself has kind of like gained a little bit of maturity over the past couple of years, maybe the last year and a half is pretty much where we saw the stuff kind of like that was obviously a gimmick kind of fall to the wayside, and then we started seeing some real good products, a lot of them even coming from like the bigger brands where they've been putting out smart connected devices for a long time that now are just kind of moving into a more mature state. And products like Ring, which had like a nice little square doorbell, and now they're getting more and more refined on their products, the cameras and everything as they move along. So what do you think about that? How things have matured here in the last couple of years?
I think it's fantastic, and I think we've moved from more gadgets to more practical, devices. So, people were willing to put up with a lot of crap, for lack of a better term, early on. And I think as they realize, hey, this thing is taking more time from me to reset or to manage than it is giving me time back, is part of what has kind of, you've watched the field shrink, right? I think the other thing is too, is I think just like with anything new, it garners a lot of excitement early on. And then the reality of things come in. So for example, monetization strategies with the startup community that have built these things. I always say there's two different kinds of startups. There are missionaries and there are mercenaries. Mercenaries, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're building a company to be sold. Missionaries are building a company because they have a mission in mind and they want to deliver something special to the end user, and they have that great vision. And I think you've seen examples of both of them survive, thrive, but you've also seen a number of them crash and disappear. Because what people began to realize is, hey, wait a minute, connecting and managing data in the cloud and things like that actually costs money. And I think also what we've seen is, and we're really hoping we could avoid was, in our case, we were paranoid about someone coming out and putting a product out that was insecure, and they would have such a bad experience with it from a privacy or a theft standpoint that it would kill the whole category, that people would lose confidence.
We've heard that from a number of men, like that seems to like come from the security and the lock guys. Yeah. Hands down, like we're not putting a connected thing on this until it is secured, because you're go hand in hand with being able to lock your door, and that would absolutely. I think that focus came from you guys earlier on than it did anybody else.
Well, we've been. I mean, Walter Schlage, one of his first patents was actually, believe it or not, this was way before the internet, right? It was, hey, I want to be able, when I open a door, I want a light bulb to turn on. This was way back in, I think, like 1909 or something. I mean, way back. And we started making residential connected devices in 2008. So we go way back in terms of time with this. And what we were seeing was things that were being rushed to market that weren't necessarily being thoroughly thought through. And part of it wasn't intentional. Part of it was, you don't know what you don't know. If you haven't been in the security business, for example, it sounds really interesting to say, hey, I want my door to automatically unlock when I approach it, right? Well, if you're a security company, you might actually think about that a little bit differently, because you better have at least two Bluetooth antennas on that door, so that I can tell whether you're on the outside of the door or on the inside of the door. Because if you're on the inside of the door and the door says, oh, Rob's right here, I'm going to automatically unlock, and there's somebody on the other side that you don't want coming in, that could be a pretty big problem. And so that's where we start getting into this concept of, again, it's like, you can't be fixated and fascinated by the technology. You've got to be focused on how you implement it responsibly. And even for the, cool stuff, that's mainly for entertainment. When you're talking about managing people's data and privacy and other things like that, you have to take it seriously. And so I think it's a natural evolution to see kind of the bigger names come in with more mature products. Not to mention the fact that also, for example, at Schlage, we have a very large mechanical portfolio that allows us to pay for research and development, and for guys like Rob to think about the latest style and design elements. Whereas a lot of people early on were very limited. It's like, hey, here's my gadget. Isn't it cool? And then people are looking for change a year and a half later. And if you're a small startup, you probably don't have the kind of budget in order to do those things. So it's kind of a natural shift. I think the other part that is really important to point out is, just because your device is connected doesn't mean it has to be ugly. It doesn't, you pointed it out with what Jamie's got going on at Ring. He's done a really nice job, and the team's done a really nice job of making the product look better and better and more streamlined. And, a huge part of what Schlage, is trying to deliver is a combination of security and aesthetics. Who wants an ugly thing hanging from your door? And in addition to that, who wants something hanging from your door that doesn't match with the rest, for example, of your hardware? I mean,
it's the only
funny.
reason I have a Schlage lock over here is because I have Schlage locks over there. So
yeah. So I think it's really important. And as we get, embed more and more technology where it's a natural, kind of flow, you'll start to see devices that historically you haven't thought of as being a smart device being one. So, for example, out of Pin and Tumbler Studio, we created a device called Illuminabi, which is a techno-functional device. It's not a connected device, but it's a smart device. And I think you'll see more and more adoption of things like that. But again, it's not going to be successful if we're always talking about it being smart. It just needs to be home.
Right.
Right.
Well, these are great points. I really enjoyed hearing your perspectives on this. We're bumping up against our time a little bit. So as we bring things home to conclusion a little bit, talk about Schlage. I know you've mentioned the encode lock several times, and that's been out, I think, for a little while. Maybe touch on that and talk, perhaps even more importantly, what's next? What's getting you guys excited? I would say both with that specific family of products as well as just broadly speaking with the IoT space.
Sure. So, Schlage, security is still the top priority, right? But I think continuing to offer kind of that range of styles that are going to fit, in whatever type of home you have is going to be super important. So we don't want people to feel like, hey, I have to sacrifice what it looks like in order to get the best technology. So that's one commitment that we have right off the top. So you're going to continue to see new styles, new designs, cool things. What you can expect to see from us is the Schlage Encode smart Wi-Fi deadbolt is kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we want to see in terms of building out the ecosystem. So, as of right now, you probably know you can use the Schlage Home app, you can use the Key by Amazon app. There's a variety of different things you can do, but you'll continue to see more and more what I would term as beneficial integrations, where it's suit for purpose, where it's going to give you, the user, control. And I would say hopefully a really simple, beneficial interface that allows for you to get out of the device what you want to get out of it without being buried in the minutia and the huge number of features and all these other pieces. What I would also say you can expect from Schlage is, we talked about our innovation engines, and we talked about our partnerships and other things, and we're very excited about what we're seeing. And I'll leave some things for mystery here, but take a look take a look at who we're working with, and you can start to extrapolate a little bit as to the interesting types of places where you'll see us not only integrate for your homeowners, but also outside where we play in a variety of areas. It's a exciting space to be in, because in a world that is heavily focused on edge computing, when you're in that special geography, think about how many times a day you walk through that door. It is pretty amazing if you think about it. It is full of possibilities. We can make other products in your home smarter. And the best part about that is you don't have to pay an additional premium to do that.
Right. Awesome, Rob. Well, this was great. Like I said, really enlightening. Enjoyed learning more about you and your perspectives and all of the ventures that you've got your hands in. Sounds like enough to keep your plate full, and really interesting conversation. If our listeners, any of them wanted to follow up with you, connect, learn a little bit more, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, you can absolutely, first and foremost, you can follow us on, at Schlage.com or Schlage Locks on Instagram. You can find me me personally at Schlage Futurist on Twitter. And obviously you can find more information, for example, at AllegionVentures.com as well.
Awesome. All right, Rob. Well, thanks again for coming on. Wish you all the best with everything you've got going on, and don't be a stranger.
No, thank you so much for having me. It was fun to talk to you guys.
All right. Thanks, Rob. All right. That'll do it for our interview with Rob. And again, I really enjoyed getting his perspectives and some of his, shall we say, strong opinions on the current state of the Internet of Things, and frankly, what can be done by companies to continue to raise the bar. I think it's really important. Seth, you and I have watched this industry evolve for many, many years, including, of course, the years that we've been doing this show. And I think we've kind of gone through that we went through that initial peak that we talked about, and then things kind of went back down and settled. And now I hope we're poised as an industry to really get to that next level. And I think Rob had some really good perspectives on that.
Yeah, that's what you get with experience.
Right.
Are the opinions that Rob has. So yeah, it was a really good interview. I'm glad we were able to sit down and chat with him. Pick of the week, kind of a follow up of last week. Oh man, I forgot to run over here and grab it. This is great. So we talked a little bit last week about the email that we received from John. I can't remember his last name now.
Yeah, John Lockyer. Apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, but John had reached out. Seth apparently liked your show recommendation.
Counterpoint it's on Amazon. It's a Starz show, but it got picked up by Amazon to, I guess, host or whatever and stream. So I think it's free with Prime. I didn't pay anything for it, and it's got some really good acting in it, and it's a really entertaining show and has a full beginning, middle, and end to the entire series. So,
and more importantly, Seth is now in the business of trading show recommendations for HomeTech museum pieces. So if you got an old piece that you want in Seth's museum, he's got a show recommendation for you.
Yeah. So John sent over the Smart Link USB, or I guess it's IR to USB, not even invented when this thing was out. IR and home X10 home automation link controller thing. I don't even know what this thing does. I was trying to read the manual. Hilariously printed on the back of the thing says copyright 1995, 1996, 1997. Man, this is a piece of history right here.
It's beautiful.
You know what is?
It is definitely a throwback.
You know what's impressive is, like, I have product that exists in my house now that was made in the past, I don't know, year or two, that looks like, without even touching it, looks worse off than this thing does. This thing is beautiful. It was built like a tank in 1995. It survived for so many years in its form. And John also sent along the instruction manuals and a printout of the webpage that you could from I think it was smarthome.com, where you could buy this back in the day. It was a web archive printout of the web page. I thought it was great. So good stuff. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, love it. Add that one to the collection, Seth, and you've got a growing ensemble there.
I've got X10 is what I've got. I mean, that's...
No museum would be complete without X10.
I think you're right. I cleaned off some of the shelf back there, so I've got some extra space. And I was looking on eBay earlier today for one of those Jibos. Jibos, remember the Jibo robots we talked about?
Oh yeah, I do.
I got like a T-shirt and some like of their promotional products, but I never got a Jibo. And those things were like $500 back then. People are selling them for like $800 to $900 now. So I've got to wait for the
so they've become like
stuff.
They've gone up in price.
Yes,
collector's
I thought
item.
for sure that somebody would want to dump these things, and like I would be able to pick one up on the cheap since they just don't function anymore. And no, it's actually gone the other direction. So one of these days I'll be able to get one of those Jibos. If you got a good line on a price, I'm not paying $900. I'm not paying $500 for one. It's like,
no, Seth barters in show recommendations.
yeah, I've got some really good shows to tell you about.
All right, I love it. Thanks,
list.
John. Yeah, we got a good laugh out of that, so we appreciate it.
Yep.
If you have any feedback, questions, comments, picks of the week, or ideas for a show topic or guest, give us a shout. Our email address is feedback@HomeTech.fm, or visit HomeTech.fm/feedback and fill out the online form.
We want to give a big thank you to everyone who supports the show, but especially those who are able to financially support the show through our Patreon page. If you don't know about our Patreon page, head on over to HomeTech.fm/support to learn how you can support HomeTech for as little as $1 a month. Any pledge over $5 a month gets you a big shout out on the show, but every pledge gets you an invite to our private Slack chat, The Hub, where you and other supporters of the show can gather every day for inside baseball conversations about all aspects of COVID-19.
Yeah.
We've got some
kidding.
epidemiologists in our thing tonight. Statisticians.
That's right.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Those conversations can get off the rails, but we do talk about home technology and some really cool other things in there. So
yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking for other ways to support the show, we'd appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes or in your podcast app of choice. Those positive reviews definitely help people find the show. So if you enjoy what we're doing here on the Home Tech Podcast, please take a minute to leave us a positive review. We would really appreciate it.
Well, Jason, wraps up another week. I can't believe it does wrap up another week because it feels like just yesterday I was sitting down to edit all like 19 tracks of our episode 300. That was a
big one.
That was a big one. I know a lot more about how Zoom decides it wants to arbitrarily record audio. And not exactly the way I thought it was going to go.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, thanks for the extra work. I'm sure that was not an easy one. And thanks to everybody again who came on and joined us on that sort of experimental roundtable format that we did. Had a lot of fun putting that show together. Great
talking to everybody. I'll echo that. Really appreciate everybody showing up. It definitely made for a fun conversation. And just show it. I liked going back and listening to it, and had a really good time just listening to it over the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Seth. Well, stay safe, stay well, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks everybody. Have a good one.